Good morning, everyone. My name is Brad Potter, and I'm one of the senior fellows here at the Center for Global Security Research at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I am going to be kind of the master of ceremonies today, and I am absolutely thrilled to be introducing one of my colleagues here at CGSR, Dr. Anna Peczeli, who will be discussing a new paper that she has underway dealing with the sizing of the U.S. nuclear force in general. Dr. Peczeli joins us from Stanford University, where she was a researcher for several years. She joined CGSR first as a postdoc and now as a senior fellow, where she continues to do a wide range of research on U.S. Nuclear strategy, as well as arms control and cooperative approaches to security. Prior to Stanford, she held a variety of positions in Hungary at academic and research institutions. She earned her PhD at Corvinus University in Budapest, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her today with us. Just a couple of ground rules before we start. Her presentation will be on the record, and that is an opportunity to really see some work in progress. But the Q&A session, we'll hold that off record, just to really hopefully have a free-flowing conversation. So with that, I want to turn it over to Anna, and I'll get off our camera here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the chance to be here today and talk about this research project. So as Brad mentioned, today I'm going to talk about a work in progress. The title is Sizing the U.S. Nuclear Force for Adversarial Multipolarity. And just to quickly run through the outline of this talk, I will talk very briefly about the research design and what led to this research project in general. Then with a quick review, I will give you a snapshot of where we are right now and how we got here. Then the bulk of the research and analytical work will deal with the key drivers of force sizing concerns in the current security environment. The next section will talk about main considerations for force sizing decisions in the current context, and then importantly also about the main constraints and limiting factors that prevent us from implementing some of the more ideal solutions to the problems. And then the last two sections will drive home some important policy implications for force structure decisions in this multipolar world, and then I will have a few concluding takeaways. So just very briefly, how this project all started. Every year we get from Stratcom an analytic agenda that contains a long list of questions that Stratcom is interested about and provides CGSR and other folks at the lab an opportunity to dive a little deeper in these research questions. And last year, I had the chance to deal with the force sizing metrics for a multipolar environment. So this is right now a paper that has been submitted to Stratcom, and I'm hoping to publish it in an academic journal. So this is really a great time for me to get some feedback, get some testing and probing questions. And if you think that somewhere I might be wrong, then please feel free to share your concerns. This is a great opportunity for me to test run this talk and to get some useful feedback on it. In general, force sizing considerations in a historical context, we have seen that that there have been very different approaches to what is considered to be sufficient. Sometimes it was based on very concrete mathematical formulas. The classic example is Robert McNamara's and Alan Enthoven's formula, which suggested having 401 megaton weapons that would destroy 20 to 30% of the Soviet population and about 50 to 70% of its industrial capacity, which at the time was considered to be the key formula to achieve mass assured destruction. Other times we get less specific bumper stickers, like, for example, second to none, which was a frame that was included in the 2001 NPR document under the Bush administration. And what they basically meant by this formulation was that the United States must maintain rough parity with other nuclear states, and it cannot accept inferiority. So whether it was, at least in the public domain, some very specific mathematical formula or something more general, there have been some overarching themes from the beginning of the nuclear age, and each US president seems to have been strongly in support of maintaining rough numerical parity with the nearest nuclear rivals, and also each US administration have so far rejected the idea of inferiority to other nuclear competitors. So these have been true for every single US administration so far. With regards to the benchmarks for the current debate, we have seen that with China's rise as a second nuclear peer and seeing how it has expanded its nuclear and diversified its nuclear forces, many important government documents and also government officials have been emphasizing that we can no longer look at China as a lesser included case. This has classically meant that the only nuclear peer to the United States was the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation. And anything that was enough to deter Russia would be enough to deter every single other nuclear competitor of the United States. So it basically meant that China was considered to be this lesser included case. However, with China's rise as a second nuclear peer, this approach is probably no longer maintainable, and we need to revisit what is the right size for US nuclear forces in a multipolar environment where the US, for the first time in its history, is facing two nuclear peers. The 2023 Bipartisan Strategic Posture Commission echoed some of these findings, and they also emphasized that the current modernization program is absolutely necessary, but it is insufficient to meet the challenges of this two-peer environment. This has been widely accepted by government officials, both in the Biden administration, and many of these findings have been echoed by key government officials under the current Trump administration as well. At the same time, it seems that while there is a political consensus that the current modernization program is not enough, many officials also add that the United States does not need to match the combined amount of adversary nuclear forces to have an effective deterrent, which means that something more is needed than what we have right now and what the program of record suggests, but it doesn't need to equal the combined amount of Russian and Chinese nuclear forces. And in between these two benchmarks or milestones, there's not really any additional guidance on what is the right size for US nuclear forces and what should guide this debate. So the goal of this research project was to guide this force sizing discussion and help to identify the key questions that we need to answer before we can come to a right number. Just to be very clear upfront, I am not going to advocate for a specific number. There are two main reasons why I think it's not really a wise approach to say that there is a magic number right now that we have to pursue. The first reason is that some components of US nuclear force planning and especially employment plans is of course not publicly available. So there's not much we can do in the public domain that would get us to an accurate number. And second, the security environment is rapidly changing. We have open-ended modernization programs ongoing both in Russia and China, and we don't necessarily know where their nuclear force sizes will continue to grow in a 5 or 10-year time frame. And we also have a number of emerging technologies that are complicating the picture, and what seems to be enough right now might not be enough 5 years from now, and definitely down the road in a longer time frame. So I think instead of picking a magic number and trying to advocate for one specific number for overall US nuclear forces, the right approach is to think through what are the considerations that even go into this debate and how we should think about the main quantitative and qualitative criteria that should guide our discussion about sizing the US nuclear force. So where we are now and how we got here. As I mentioned, there has been a great degree of continuity among US administrations, and this is especially true for the post-Cold War era. Every single US administration since the end of the Cold War has issued a nuclear posture review document. And despite the fact that on the surface, at least in rhetoric, these administrations had very different ideas about the right approaches and the role of nuclear weapons, at the same time, when we look at these documents, we see a great degree of continuity among these administrations. And the key features when it comes to force sizing metrics that show a lot of continuity are the rejection of minimum deterrence, maintaining a role for counter-force operations, supporting the maintenance of the strategic triad, and emphasizing the goal to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal. These 4 points have been present in every single nuclear posture review document since the end of the Cold War. The current program of record was adopted by the Obama administration in 2010. This was in the framework of a grand bargain that included concluding the New START treaty and getting confirmation for this treaty. And in exchange for that, the Obama administration committed to embark on a modernization program that would include all 3 legs of the nuclear triad. And what we have today is basically, with minor adjustments, the same program of record that was approved in this 2010 bargain. There were 4 key underlying assumptions that led the modernization program as it was conceived in 2010. The first assumption was that Russia would be a partner for the United States. The second was that China would stick to its minimum deterrence posture. The third assumption was that informal and formal arms control agreements could be pursued with both Russia and China. And the last assumption was that rogue threats from North Korea and Iran would be resolved through diplomacy. The force sizing decisions in light of these 4 assumptions led to a strategic nuclear force that would meet the New START central limits, that is 1550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads and 800 deployed and non-deployed strategic delivery systems. And in addition to that, a very limited non-strategic nuclear arsenal. The Obama administration also decided to retire the nuclear-equipped Tomahawk missiles, and it also decided to demurge the ICBM force of the United States. So this was the force design that was implemented in the Obama years, and with, as I said, with very minor adjustments, especially in non-strategic nuclear capabilities. This is basically the same program of record for the past 15 years. The main challenge why we question whether this program of record is sufficient today is because the security environment has fundamentally changed, and none of the 4 assumptions that led us to this program of record hold true anymore. Russia is no longer a partner. In fact, it has violated most of its arms control agreements, and we have seen that it exercised aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and it has an ongoing war with Ukraine since 2022. China has also embarked on a massive nuclear buildup that was not foreseen in 2010. The New START agreement is about to expire in February, and at the moment it seems very certain that there will be no replacement for this agreement. And we also have seen that North Korea and Iran have improved their capabilities, sophisticated their missile technologies, and in the case of North Korea, we have a greater and better arsenal at hand. And in the case of Iran, we see that they have taken important steps since 2010 to get closer to a so-called breakout capacity. So none of the assumptions that informed the 2010 program of record stand true anymore. In fact, they have dramatically shifted towards the wrong direction. So we are left with a situation where we look at the security environment that is more complex, more unstable, more unpredictable than the 2010 security environment, which raises very legitimate concerns about the adequacy of the US nuclear force as it was conceived in 2010. There are a number of key drivers that I think really inform this discussion about force sizing concerns. And I will highlight what I identify the 4 key of these concerns that I think have very important implications for how much is enough and how we should think about sufficiency criteria. The first one is increasing nuclear arsenals by adversaries. Russia has in the past 15 years implemented very significant qualitative improvements in its strategic nuclear weapons. Of course, just like the United States, it was bound by the New START Treaty, so it could not significantly increase the number of its strategic nuclear weapons, but it has achieved improvements both in survivability and effectiveness. It has also introduced a line of novel capabilities that have actually increased the survivability, flexibility, and some of the redundancy features of its arsenal. And it has also significantly diversified its non-strategic nuclear capabilities. As of now, more than 90% of the Russian missile force is actually next generation advanced missile system. They have achieved great successes in their modernization efforts. Unlike Russia, China has primarily focused on the quantitative improvements of its nuclear forces. This is one of the largest and most rapid expansion of nuclear forces we have ever seen, especially in the post-Cold War era. Since 2020, they have doubled their nuclear arsenal, and it's expected that by 2035 they could possess 1,500 operational warheads, deployed operational warheads. And they have also implemented important upgrades to their delivery platforms. And we have seen that there is ongoing discussion about increasing the readiness level of Chinese nuclear forces, which could mean, according to many speculations, that we might see China shifting towards a launch on warning posture, which would be in stark contrast to its traditional no first use policy that it has held since the 1960s. We also see important improvements in North Korea and Iran. In North Korea, there have been important leaps in the sophistication of warhead designs, advancements in thermonuclear weapons and mobile ICBMs, which provide North Korea with a better capability to threaten the US homeland. And as I have mentioned, Iran has also significantly improved its missile program, and it has got closer to a nuclear breakout capacity since 2010. All of these developments, of course, have important implications for US nuclear force sizing, since adversary nuclear forces have always been a key feature in how the US conceived its sufficiency metrics, and rapid growth in adversary nuclear forces does have some implications for numbers and how we should think about sufficiency today. The other important concern is multipolarity in general and the closer collaboration among these adversaries. Admiral Charles Richard, former STRATCOM commander, called it the three-body problem, which is inherently more unstable, inherently more complex, and more difficult to address. And many others also emphasize that this is not only a three-body problem between the United States, Russia, and China, but we also have additional competitive dyads, like, for example, the India-China dyad, that influence some of these force sizing considerations and also deterrence postures. So this has inherently become a more complex environment to manage and to address. The other big challenge today is that we have seen increasing collaboration between US adversaries, especially Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And this cooperation has extended the military, political, and economic and diplomatic domains. In the military domain, it included intelligence sharing, other non-lethal aid, offensive and defensive systems, munitions, deploying combatants and equipment. So if these collaborative efforts continue in the future, one important implication for the United States is that the likelihood of two simultaneous wars in two separate theaters has dramatically increased. And if the United States must fight two wars with major peer adversaries, it might find itself in a difficult situation where in the second theater, it could face conventional inferiority, and as a result of that, it might need to increase its reliance on nuclear weapons to compensate for that for the conventional losses, which is definitely again a new feature of this security environment. The third concern is that we see growing multi-domain threats and cross-domain deterrence challenges. Many of the emerging technologies that all three major powers are actively pursuing could introduce new vulnerabilities and escalatory pathways in the great powers relationship, and they also make it very difficult to accurately assess the military balance between peer adversaries, and open the way for miscalculations and mistakes, which can come with a very high price when it comes to inadvertent escalation. And the last concern that drives this discussion today is the imbalance of stakes. Most in the case of Russia and China, it seems that they believe that there is an asymmetry of stakes that favors them, and the United States in their respective theaters would be fighting in remote regions over limited national security goals, and they believe that they can exploit this, and they overestimate their own resolve, while massively underestimating the US desire to get into a conflict to defend limited objectives or defend allies, which actually makes both Russia and China to be more likely to take escalatory risks. And again, this could trigger a conventional war that could rapidly escalate into a nuclear confrontation in either one of these theaters. So all these four factors add up to a very dangerous and unstable security environment, where again the United States must revisit whether the 2010 program of record and the force size that it envisioned then still holds, and whether it provides the necessary deterrence against the number of these challenges. One important quote I put on the top of this slide is, "Seeking more or fewer nuclear weapons is not a strategy in and of itself." This is a quote from Pat McKenna. I find it very true, and I think it's very important that we should not get too stuck with numbers discussions, because all of these decisions about numbers should be driven by strategy. We first have to answer a long list of important questions before we can come down to the weeds of actually identifying the right force size. And in the next slide, I will talk a little bit more about how or what are these types of questions that we first need to answer before we can talk about numbers. In this next chapter, I identified four main considerations for force sizing decisions, and I will quickly run through them and give you a little bit more context. The first one, as I mentioned, is strategy and political objectives. This has been from the very beginning of the nuclear era true that each US administration had to answer a few critical questions, which include what actions will need to be deterred in general in the given security environment, what threats need to be issued to successfully deter those threats, and what capabilities will be needed to back up those threats. I think it's very important to emphasize that not all major strategic threats have a nuclear solution. Nuclear weapons do not solve every problem for the United States, and I think the WMD threats in the early 2000s were a good example for this. So nuclear weapons do play an important role in strategic deterrence, but they are not a solution for every single problem. In the most recent 2022 NPR document, there were three key objectives that the Biden administration outlined for US nuclear forces: deterring a strategic attack, assuring allies and partners, and achieving US objectives if deterrence fails. In terms of why this is important for US strategic force sizing discussions, deterring strategic attacks, for example, have traditionally required a force that is able to survive a massive nuclear attack, which is a qualitative criteria, and it was also large enough to inflict unacceptable damage in response to an aggression, which was an important quantitative criteria. So all of these different objectives have several embedded qualitative and quantitative requirements for US nuclear forces. Right now, we do not know if the Trump administration will issue a new nuclear posture review document. Very likely that they will not. However, the administration will still need to answer a few key questions before we can even talk about specific numbers. They must first review whether these three roles that were outlined in 2022 still hold true. The administration also needs to decide whether the US wants to continue extend deterrence. What threats are credible in any given situation, what capabilities are needed to back up those threats, and what role nuclear weapons generally play in US national security. Without answering these key questions, again, it's very difficult to identify the right number for US force sizing. The second important consideration for this discussion is the military balance vis-a-vis adversaries. This has been true from the beginning, that conventional military balances have long been intertwined with nuclear sufficiency discussions, and not all gaps in nuclear forces require a reciprocal buildup. One of the most notable examples is the US and also NATO decision that we do not need to match Russian non-strategic nuclear weapons 1-for-1 to have an effective deterrence in the European theater. We have long accepted some degree of asymmetry because we relied on conventional superiority or superiority in other fields that actually made up for from some numerical imbalances in certain subset of nuclear capabilities. As I mentioned, it has been true that that in strategic nuclear capabilities, the US has always pursued rough numerical parity with its peer adversaries, but in the non-strategic nuclear domain, this has not really been true, and we have consciously accepted some asymmetries here because we could rely on some of our conventional forces to do the deterrence task vis-a-vis Russia. There are three key factors that should inform our assessment of the military balance. The first one is adversary forces and strategy. We have to revisit what type of challenge they represent, what is their risk tolerance, where their nuclear modernization efforts are headed, and what are the gaps that they identify vis-a-vis the United States and its allies, and how do they intend to exploit these gaps. The second key factor is allied capabilities and extended deterrence commitments. Allies has, especially in the past few years, indicated that they are willing to step up their game, and now the conversation is not even about a more even burden sharing, much rather about burden shifting to allies. And many of our allies have stepped up. They have invested more in non-strategic, in non-nuclear strategic assets, and they are eager to do even more to supplement US capabilities, and we have to consider the totality of allied capabilities, as well as we also have to keep in mind what are the capabilities that allies do find credible for their own assurance, and how does that inform our thinking about future capabilities that the United States might need to acquire. The last key factor here is the US non-nuclear strategic toolkit. These capabilities can play a key role in both deterrence by punishment and also deterrence by denial approaches. With the advent of precision strike capabilities, many of the traditional targets that in the past were it was only able to hold them at risk through nuclear targeting might have opened up to certain conventional missions, so they can in a limited set of instances conventional capabilities can actually not just supplement but replace nuclear targeting, and when it comes to deterrence by denial approaches, of course dramatic investments in missile defense and other capabilities can actually relax requirements for nuclear capabilities, and this can have a fundamental effect on how we think about sufficiency. Moving on to the third and the fourth consideration that informs this discussion. The third one is, of course, operational factors. There's honestly nothing new here from the beginning of the nuclear era, these criteria and factors have been important in nuclear force planning. Of course, the key question in terms of targeting is the United States going to continue to pursue counter force targeting or counter value targeting? Because of course, counter force targeting means that we need to hold at risk adversary military targets and have enough capability to limit damage in the case of a massive nuclear war. This means that if adversaries are dramatically increasing their nuclear forces, then the US would probably need more nuclear weapons to hold those forces at risk. So counterforce is directly intertwined with our thinking about quantitative requirements. If the United States decided to shift to more of a counter value targeting, that would mean that only a few hundred nuclear weapons could hold important softer industrial and population targets at risk. So in that case, a dramatic increase in adversary nuclear forces would not automatically translate into an increased requirement for more nuclear weapons. In terms of damage expectancy levels, these outline how likely it is that a nuclear attack will achieve some degree of destruction of a target. Obviously, if an administration wants higher damage expectancy levels, that usually required both quantitatively and qualitatively adjusting US nuclear forces and potentially having more sophisticated and or more nuclear weapons. The quality of intelligence and targeting is another very important factor under operational considerations. Intelligence is the lifeblood of nuclear planning. This was a quote that I found in the Managing Nuclear Operations Handbook, and it's very true that good intelligence about location and the vulnerability of adversary nuclear forces could mean the difference between using a nuclear weapon to hold that specific target at risk, or actually being able to target with maybe a non-nuclear option. So quality of intelligence is another sometimes overlooked but very important feature here. And of course, active and passive defenses. In terms of active defenses, the obvious example is missile defense. And in terms of passive defenses, mobility, redundancy, concealment, and hardening have been the traditional strategies that provided these passive defense capabilities. These mechanisms, if adversaries are successful, they can increase the bar for successful strike options. And depending on adversary defenses, the same number of target could have very different force requirements for the United States. So of course we have to consider how advanced they are in their own defenses. And on the flip side, we also have to consider US force vulnerability considerations. And as I mentioned before, one of the main tenets of US nuclear force sizing has been that we need to maintain a secure second strike capability that is able to survive a massive nuclear attack by a peer adversary and still have enough weapons to inflict unacceptable damage on them. This, in the Cold War period, to a certain degree, rested on, of course, a lot of nuclear weapons, but also, very importantly, a great diversity of nuclear forces that created such a complex targeting challenge for the Soviet Union that they never felt tempted to actually attack the United States with a massive bolt of the blue nuclear strike. Since the end of the Cold War, we have significantly reduced both the number, but more importantly, also the diversity of US nuclear forces. So of course, in light of emerging technologies and also in light of the rise of a second nuclear peer, we need to reconsider some of these vulnerability issues from a US perspective. And the last factor that we have to consider for force sizing decisions is technological factors and uncertainties. As I have mentioned several times before, emerging technologies can alter the effectiveness of nuclear weapons in many unpredictable ways. They can undermine systems' functionality, complicate war planning, and also introduce new escalatory pathways, sometimes deliberately, other times inadvertent escalatory pathways. This puts a high premium on thinking about hedging against many of these uncertainties. And hedging has implications both for reserve capabilities and overall numbers, but also about key decisions when it comes to keeping or abandoning certain key competencies. For example, at the end of the Cold War, the United States voluntarily declared a testing moratorium, and it stopped developing new nuclear weapons. Plus, it has dismantled many of the supporting capabilities that were crucial for both nuclear testing and also for developing new nuclear weapons. In the grand scheme of things, it might take years or rather decades to restart most of these activities and to get back where we were at the peak of US production capacity in the Cold War years if we decide to do so. So hedging is not only about reserve forces and being able to quickly upload, it's also about certain key competencies that can give us quick adaptability in the face of a rapidly changing security environment. And of course, the right size for the hedge is always going to come down to the risk tolerance of a given leader and how much risk they are willing to accept. The key implications of these different considerations is that the United States currently have to plan for a growing number of uncertainties. There is uncertainty about where adversaries are heading. There is uncertainty about the adversaries' desire to cooperate in the future and to what degree it will achieve. There is uncertainty about the escalatory thresholds and pathways, what might lead to nuclear escalation in any given conventional confrontation. And there is also uncertainty about the consequences of technological innovation. The second key implication is that the main threat has changed. In the Cold War period, the primary concern was a bolt from the blue massive attack by the Soviet Union. And in stark contrast to that, in the current security environment, the most likely scenario is a small-scale attack against a US ally in a remote theater or US military forces in theater that would probably start as a conventional confrontation, and it could potentially escalate to limited nuclear use. So while adversaries believe that they would be fighting for their supreme national interests and sovereignty, from a US perspective, this would be a limited war over limited objectives, and we need to rethink how and what kind of force structure we need to meet these challenges, and how to credibly convince adversaries that we would actually not just capitulate in the face of these threats. And the third main implication is that the United States is already, to a certain degree, playing in a disadvantaged position. Adversaries have successfully altered the military balance to favor them. As I have mentioned, they have all implemented massive modernization programs and achieved great successes. And they possess right now a greater variety of options for escalation management, especially when it comes to the non-nuclear and non-strategic nuclear, limited nuclear spaces. And the US right now doesn't seem to be able to shape this competition. It is rather playing catching up and trying to figure out what to do in response to these developments. The problem is that there are many people and academic papers out there that say that we just need to rapidly increase our nuclear forces, upload a few thousand more nuclear weapons, and then it's going to solve all of our problems, or we have to develop new capabilities. However, I think what the discussion usually misses is that there are very important constraining and limiting factors that prevent the US from implementing some of the more ideal solutions. And here I just quickly want to mention the 5 key limiting factors that make it hard to implement some of these rather ideal solutions. The first one is protecting strategic stability and avoiding a counterproductive arms race. Since the 1970s, legally binding arms control agreements have been a standard feature of great power relations. And it looks like after February this year, this is going to be the first time that US and Russian nuclear forces will be unbounded in the strategic nuclear space. This is a brand new situation. However, despite the fact that New START is likely to expire without replacement, the Trump administration has expressed a strong desire to pursue arms control agreements both with Russia and China, and also they expressed the desire to seek diplomatic solutions to the problems with North Korea and Iran, which means that when we decide about future force structure adjustments, we must consider the broader implications for strategic stability. Overreacting to some of the problems we are facing today could risk triggering an unbounded three-way arms race, which would be very expensive and also potentially very dangerous. So as we think about ideal solutions, we have to consider that there might still be a place in the future where strategic stability discussions could resume with Russia and China, and where we might be able to negotiate arms control agreements. So I just want to emphasize that overreaction might not be our best strategy here. The second constraining and limiting factor is domestic political factors and financial constraints. The 2010 modernization bargain rested on the premise that arms control will be pursued, and the New START treaty entered into effect. But since then, arms control negotiations with Russia and China have been stalled or absolutely not fruitful. And as far as I can judge, the program of record seems to continue to enjoy bipartisan support. However, both new capabilities and also significant cost overruns might be more heavily scrutinized, and we have seen some congressional members asking for oversight and reconsideration of some ongoing programs simply based on financial considerations. So implementing a massive amount of new capabilities would be difficult for domestic political reasons and also for financial reasons. The third constraint is infrastructure constraints and programmatic delays. As Jill Ruby, former NNSA administrator, said, the infrastructure remains fragile, and the big challenge is that the infrastructure recapitalization process is happening parallel to delivering modernized weapons, which puts a huge stress on what NNSA and the national laboratories are doing. And right now, a major nuclear buildup remains unrealistic. However, some important success stories suggest that there is room for innovation and modest adjustments. The W76-2 program and the B6113 programs are great examples for how innovation and modest adjustments can actually improve US flexibility without breaking the program of record and putting too much stress on the infrastructure. The fourth big constraint is timeliness. The solution space for quick fixes and boutique solutions is quite narrow. As I mentioned, we have had two important success stories, but responding to massive nuclear buildup by Russia and China in a timely manner right now is a very challenging feature, mostly because of infrastructure constraints. And the last constraint is legal constraints. As the previous 2 or 3 declassified or unclassified employment guidance document summaries included, each US administration considered it very important to emphasize that all nuclear plans must be consistent with the laws of armed conflict, which means that they need to comply with the principles of necessity, distinction, and proportionality. These put some degree of limits on how we can think about nuclear targeting. For example, there might be instances where we have to intentionally avoid targeting civilian populations, hold back certain leadership targets because they are deeply embedded in the middle of big cities. And this can also influence target selection and weapons allocation. For example, there might be cases where lower yield weapons could be needed, or conventional substitution will be essential simply because we need to meet the laws of the different principles of the laws of armed conflict. So where does this leave us? And I'm coming to the end of this presentation. The key policy implications for force structure discussions in the current environment. In general, I think there is a very clear growing tension between the rapidly deteriorating security environment and the growing force requirements on the one side, and the number of constraints on the other side, which has not only multiplied in number, but the constraints have also become, in certain cases, more severe than they used to be in the past. The developments in adversary strategy and capabilities point to specific qualitative requirements, namely having a more flexible, adaptable, and resilient nuclear arsenal, while also provide incentives to make quantitative adjustments in the diversity and size of US nuclear forces. But on the other hand, the constraints suggest that a major nuclear buildup is not realistic in the near future, and adding a diverse set of new capabilities could actually undermine the ongoing program of record, which is absolutely essential and necessary. So the most viable path forward seems to be doubling down on the qualitative aspects of nuclear force improvements while seeking minor quantitative adjustments. This is exactly what Secretary of Energy Chris Wright have echoed in an earlier speech last year. He said, so what we need to do now is just modernize. We don't need to grow our nuclear stockpile, but modernize our weapons. Additionally, I think it's also very crucial to take steps to remain competitive in the long run, and I will talk a little bit more about what that means. So on the qualitative side, flexibility have traditionally meant providing the president with a sufficient range of options. This has meant new capabilities and what's important right now is that it does not need to automatically mean increasing the overall size of the arsenal. Again, the B6113 program was a great example where the overall size of the ongoing B6112 modernization program has been cut, and the new capabilities were using the existing production lines of the B6112. So we were able to achieve a little bit more flexibility, a better new capability within the framework of the ongoing modernization program and without putting too much stress on the overall production lines. Adaptability. The US must be able to respond at the speed of relevance. There are many possible approaches that could actually support the principle of adaptability: the development of variable payloads, assorted weapon yields, the ability to forward deploy certain assets, dual capable systems, warhead and platform designs that can be upgraded and modified without a complete overhaul. And in addition to that, I think we should not forget about the importance of adaptability when it comes to planning and executing new strike options. As I have emphasized many times, the key feature of this security environment is that it's unpredictable, and we don't necessarily foresee all of the instances where we might rapidly need to develop nuclear war plans and target plans and actually execute these plans. So we also have to think about improving adaptability in situation assessment, courses of action, development, evaluation, and execution under serious time constraints in very dangerous situations. And lastly, resilience on the qualitative side. This is closely tied to maintaining a secure second strike capability. We have to revisit the strategies of concealment, hardening, and redundancy, which have been the three key strategies to improve resilience, and see how they fare against technological innovation. Right now, with the new revolution in precision strike and also remote sensing, it seems that hardening and concealment are not as viable strategies for continued resilience as they used to be in the Cold War period. And there's a growing literature that suggests that the pathway forward should be doubling down on redundancy. However, this is a very consequential new feature, and here the main difference is that concealment and hardening were rather qualitative criteria for US nuclear forces, while redundancy is actually a very important quantitative criteria. So if we want to double down on redundancy, that might actually mean significant force sizing improvements. And of course, here we have to also think about command and control systems and redundancy, improved redundancy in command and control. I think adaptability and resilience is also a very important factor that we have to implement in the weapons complex. The ability to scale operations up and down more faster and taking appropriate risks, and in general decreasing burdensome processes and better understanding the different trade-offs that are involved in all of these decisions could be important things that we have to rethink when it comes to the nuclear weapons complex. On the quantitative side, the most viable short-term option is uploading. There are different estimates how many nuclear weapons the US could currently upload on its strategic nuclear forces, probably a few hundred on all three legs of the triad. But we also have to revisit how the US is approaching hedging, because besides the capacity to quickly replenish the arsenal from the hedge, we also have to think about 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and we have to invest in the nuclear weapons complex to be able to build new nuclear weapons in a timely manner if the security environment continues to dramatically deteriorate. So the conclusions, as it's very clear from this entire presentation, my judgment is that the options on the quantitative side are very thin, and the good news is that there are ways to relax force requirements and mitigate some of the constraints. However, this is not really the primary area where I think the US has a lot of wiggle room. A few boutique solutions that we can consider on the quantitative side is, of course, technological innovation, which might open new options to shift the burden of strategic deterrence to non-nuclear capabilities. A second option is enhanced collaboration with allies, which could help to undermine adversary confidence in their ability to manage escalation, especially if allies are buying into more non-nuclear strategic capabilities. And the third way is, of course, as I mentioned, numbers are not everything. Adversary perceptions are also very important. Adversaries have their own perception of the military balance and what they consider to be effective and necessary for their own deterrence purposes. Maybe performing influence operations to shape adversary anxieties about their own capabilities and the reliability of their own deterrence could prove to be helpful. But these are, again, minor boutique solutions. The key takeaway from this entire presentation is that the security environment has changed for the worse, and new gaps have emerged, and uncertainties make deterrence failure more likely. So adjustments are clearly needed. And despite the fact that many possible solutions are not realistic given the number of constraints that I have listed before, I think the good news is that not all gaps require a response, and not all responses need to be nuclear. So I don't think we need to panic yet. We just have to think strategically about what we are able to do given the current constraints. Thank you so much for your attention. I really look forward to your feedback and questions.